Good day. My name is Samuel. I work for one of the multinational companies around. In the last 15 years, I've worked for 3 different multinational companies, obviously at different roles and at different organizational levels. However, one of the things I'm most proud of in my career is that I've worked across different functions and departments. I started off working in a logistics company, and I did supply chain. I did a lot of planning, mostly demand planning, before I moved into commercial roles. But today, I'm going to be talking to you about selling and understanding value chains. As you can imagine, there are different value chain layers for every product. Value chain starts off with the consumer and the end users, and to everyone that is touching the product as the product journeys from the manufacturer to the end users. Yes, I said touching the product. Touching in this case means everyone that the product passes through, from the manufacturer to the big wholesalers to the smaller wholesalers to the retail outlet, before it eventually reaches the consumer. This is the topic today. But before I go on, I would like to give my perspective on some myths around sales. As you might be aware, there are a lot of myths around sales. I would like to take my time to share my view on some of them. The first myth around sales states that sales is only for people in the sales department. Nothing can be further away from the truth than this. Sales is an art before it is a profession. Sales is actually one of the things we do every day. But the issue is, most often, even while we are selling, we don't even know that we are selling. Hence, sometimes we are not very successful. I guess then the first thing is to do is to define what sales is. Selling is a transfer of emotions from one person or from one party to another. Now I understand what might be going through your mind. Sales in its basic form goes like this. You have an idea, you have a belief, you have a passion, and you want to share same with someone else. You want someone else to have the same passion as you or believe in a product. Sometimes you want something back in return for sharing this passion. Or sometimes you want your audience to take a course of action or to act in a particular way in return for sharing this passion. Selling is happening every day between spouses, siblings, colleagues, and friends. But I guess it's better for me to kick off with a very basic example. But I'll need to employ your imagination as we go. Imagine 2 friends, Ade and Olu. Both of them living together and are planning on what they are going to do for the weekend. Ade wants to stay indoors all day playing video games, while Olu is nursing the idea of partying all weekend. Only one thing is certain. and that is the two of them must spend the weekend together. If they both end up staying indoors, then Ade was successful in his effort to sell his weekend idea. However, if they end up partying all weekend, then Olu was probably more successful. In the process of agreeing on what to do, there might have been some exchange of values. For instance, Olu might have promised to Ade that if he goes out partying with him all weekend, then all the drinks will be on him. Now that's a price. A price Olu is willing to pay to get Ade out with him. In the same way, Ade might have agreed that if Olu stays home playing video games with him, then Ade will reciprocate and party with Olu the following weekend. That is another price, one that Ade is willing to pay. If there is an agreement of such between Olu and Ade, then transaction is already taking place. Sales is already happening. To really wrap this up in your mind, it's imperative to think of sales in its very basic form. And one of such is an example of what I gave. An occurrence that probably happens every day and we are not paying attention, that in the process of that agreement, there was a transaction. Like I said at the beginning, sales is first and heart before it is a profession. As heart, all of us are involved in it. As a profession, maybe only those people carrying the sales title or working in the sales department. So before we proceed, I would like you to think of other instances in your daily life where you think sales are occurring as an art, not as a profession. Ones that you might have been involved with in the past without knowing. Could have been between you and your friends, your partner, your parents. I'll give you a minute for that. But as you think, I challenge you to think about what might have been exchanged in the process also. Sometimes they are tangible things. Sometimes they also could be intangible things to close those sales. I'll give you some minute to think and I'll see you in a bit. Welcome back. I'm sure you are beginning to view selling in a different way, with the mindfulness of the reality that selling or sales is happening every day between us seamlessly. Let's step ahead and look at the second myth around sales. The second one I want to tackle says that people working in sales have innate skills. That means that they were born to sell. Again, that is not always true. In life, there are many innate skills, behaviors, or abilities, and sales is not necessarily one of those. You can build the capability to sell at any time. You can learn it, you can develop it, you can build it, you can master it. Selling skills can be compared to skills we need in sports. Let's take football as a good example. Some people are born with some natural attributes that give them an advantage to be great footballers. Examples of those could be long legs, fast feet, the ability to leap higher than the average human being. and many more. I'm sure you know them. However, that does not mean that people who were not born with those natural abilities will never be great football players. The best example that comes to my mind is one of our great football legends, J.J. Okocha. If you imagine Okocha sitting on a chair, wearing a jacket and a pant, and he sits right in front of you, you most likely bet that he's not a footballer, talk less of a great footballer. However, we all know he is. His fame stretches beyond the borders of Nigeria, as he enjoyed great football spells all around the world. Looking at the picture of Okocha may not indicate to you that he's a great footballer. But when you see him on the field, you understand how great he is in the game of football. My point here is this: selling can be learned and it can be mastered. Selling is not an innate skill. You can master it if you practice it. I used to say to myself many years ago that I also cannot be a salesperson. So I know what it feels like. So we can conclude that selling can be learned, it can be mastered just like most skills. There is no such thing like he was born to sell, that's why he is a great salesman. No. If you want to also be great in selling, you can learn it. That takes me to my third and final myth, which states that selling is only for extroverted or eloquent people. This is not completely true. Of course, being extroverted and eloquent surely helps in selling. But selling is not only about closing a transaction or getting a reward for closing a transaction. Being eloquent, being extroverted will probably help you to close one transaction. But like I said, closing just one transaction doesn't make you a great salesperson. Because sales is about the designing of an environment where continuous selling can happen. Selling is a process, a system, or the design and development of a mechanism that allows product to move seamlessly from the manufacturer right to the end user. Please note the emphasis on seamlessly and continuously. In most of these examples or definitions, I refer to cases in the fast-moving consumer goods. I'm aware there are some transactions that may not need to happen every day or every week or every year. A good example is in the real estate. You most likely will not buy a house every year. So my attention today is focused on fast-moving consumer goods, where you probably need to buy the same item every week or more than once in a month. If you then start to view selling as a process, a design, or a mechanism that allows seamless, continuous flow of products from manufacturers to end users, then that mechanism that is designed to help continuous sales is called the value chain. Understanding that value chain is the main topic today. So what is the value chain? This is the ability to create value for everyone that is touching your product, up to the end user that is making use of the product. This ability to create value at every level is what guarantees the sustenance of the brand that is being sold. All the known attributes associated with sales may make a good salesperson, but creating and sustaining a value chain is what makes a great salesperson. Take a moment and think about that, and we'll catch up in my next segment. Welcome back again. We left off with a discussion on the value chain. We define the value chain as the ability to create value for everyone that the product journeys through, right from the manufacturer and down to the final consumer. The value chain then is the transport system that moves the product seamlessly and continuously in one direction. So what are the elements of the value chain then? The first and the most important element in the product value chain is the consumer, the person that makes use of the final product or service. This is the biggest stakeholder for every product. If the product meets the requirement or the expectation of the consumer, you most likely then are in business. If the consumer is not pleased, however, there is no point trying to sell. There's no point trying to build a value chain, because then we are trying to transport a product to the consumer that is not pleased or that is not willing to exchange value for that product. This is why most companies, when developing new product, they always talk to the consumer first. They try with the consumer. They get feedback from the consumer. If the consumers are not happy, there's no need to proceed. And that's what makes the consumer the most important element in the product value chain. The next question then is, what is value to the consumer? Obviously, the consumer has got needs. The first question you need to answer as a salesperson: what are the needs of the consumer? And how does my product help to solve this need or to satisfy this need? And then you begin to ask, what is the consumer willing to exchange to satisfy the need for my product? Every marketer knows that there are two moments that define the consumer's impression about your product. They are called the first and the second moment of truth. The first moment of truth is when the consumer or the shopper sees your product on the shelf or on the store. It is very important to impress the consumer at this point. You must create enough attraction for your product, else the consumer will not take it up. What that means is you must attract the consumer. Pause and think for a minute of the consumer as a beautiful girl that you need to impress. If you don't impress, she'll probably not come close to you. The heart of product consumption is similar also to fine wine. Before the wine lands on your palate, in your tongue, you first have to experience or smell. If what you smell does not meet your expectation, you probably will not have a great drinking experience. Your product must impress at the first moment of truth. However, the second moment of truth is more important than the first moment of truth. The second moment of truth is the real test is the one that it defines if the product actually satisfies the real consumer need. If it does, there is a big chance that the consumer will return to buy more. And the more often the consumer returns, or the more consumers that are returning, will ultimately define the success of the business or the brand. Unfortunately, what I've seen most time are people trying to sell products that do not satisfy the consumer need. Now you might be thinking, we should be talking about sales, selling, but we're here talking about value chain and consumer satisfaction. You're right. The truth also is that many people are attempting to sell products that don't deliver value to the consumers. And they are wondering, thinking to themselves, if they need to develop their selling skills, if they need to learn how to sell more. But in reality, that's not a problem. You might get away with selling a bad product once. I don't believe you will get away with trying to sell it every day. This is why I said at the beginning that the salesman, the best salesman, is not the one that's able to get across a transaction. It's the one that is able to get across many transactions. And that's why you need to build a solid value chain. Obviously starting with the consumer, understanding the consumer needs, and developing products that satisfy those needs. Ask yourself a question always, as a salesman: can I buy the same product I'm trying to sell to the consumer or to my customer? If your answer is not in the affirmative, then you probably need to go back to the drawing board. I guess then that this is a time for you to reflect. If you're trying to sell a product and you've not been having great success, asking yourself some tough questions. If your product delivers on the needs of the consumer, think about if you had any of those such instances and ask yourself some of those tough questions. Let's assume now that your product delivers to the consumer. Let's move one step before we move to the next segment. Welcome back. I hope you took some time to reflect on your last visit to the store and asking yourself some questions why some products are more visible and reachable than the others. It is natural for store owners to try to push items that had more value to their business than others. So you need to have a clear understanding where your product stands in the mind of the store owners. A understanding of this not only helps you to know where you stand, but can also help you to develop corrective action plans. Now let's move one step higher in the value chain. Let's ask the next question. Where does the retail store get the product from? The product being manufactured by the big manufacturing companies are not delivered directly to the retail stores. Most often than not, they are passing through big wholesalers or customers who have the capacity for scale. Scale is basically an economic language that describes the potential to handle bigger volumes or territories. In most cases, in fast-moving consumer goods industry, scale often involves warehousing capabilities and logistics. This means not only the availability of those capabilities, warehousing and logistics, but also the efficient usage of same. So when you have big wholesalers that have invested in these capabilities and you want your product to pass through them, then once again you must create the value for them. Trading with this type of customer usually requires the definition of contractual terms, or what most people refer to as terms and conditions. But basically, terms and conditions are trying to answer just one question. What is in it for me as your customer? What value can your product create for me? In this case, same as the case of the kiosk or the retail store owner, is the same logic around margins. How much can I buy your product and how much can I sell it? What value will your product create for me? What is in it for me? Always think of these questions when you're trying to sell. One of the biggest problems I've seen is salespeople focus too much attention on their product rather than their customer. Understanding what value the product brings to your customers. In our last example about the kiosk, we assume that every pack of salt gives 10 naira back to the kiosk owner. In the case of the big wholesale customers, they may not have to make up to 10 naira per pack. It could be 2 naira. However, because they have to handle bigger volumes, let's say 1,000 packs in a month, they always have absolutely bigger margin. Naturally, the higher you go in the value chain, the bigger the volume, the smaller the absolute margin per item, but in the end of the day, the higher the absolute value because of the size of the volume. And it is right, because the higher you go up in the value chain, the more investment is required to handle product. Same as the risk, and hence they have bigger margins. The knowledge and understanding of value chain is the basics of selling. Don't forget that you are trying to sell and not to rip people off. If you are then trying to sell, you need to spend some time to understand what value you can create for everyone that will touch your product. Always start from the consumer before you move up to the value chain. The best metaphor here is to imagine that selling is like a plumbing system in your house. All of us probably have one. We have a storage tank somewhere on the top of the roof or hanging on a structure within the compound. For water to flow into your kitchen, you have to make sure that all the pipes are not blocked. If you have just one blockage anywhere between the storage capacity up the roof and your kitchen tap, then we all know that the water will not flow. The idea is similar in sales. The best salespeople ensure the continuous flow of water from the storage tank into every kitchen or every restroom. Once you understand the benefit you provide to every end user or to every middleman or retailer or wholesaler that your product passes through, then you begin to understand the concept of selling. I guess then that the biggest lesson we can learn in this case is that selling is not necessarily about you or your product. It's about the value or the problem that your product helps to solve. Think first about your consumer, about your customer, about the shopper. What problem is it that you are trying to solve with them? Or how can I add value to their lives or into their business? Let's try a few examples now. I'll create an example and then you'll have some time to reflect on it before we catch up in the next section. The question I want to ask is this. You have a task to sell a Nike footwear to a retired 60-year-old couple whose kids are out of college, they are working or probably married, and these grandpas and grandmas, they have grandchildren already. The grandkids are already in the primary school. How do you think you can sell a Nike shoe to 60-year-old grandparent, retired grandparent? Have a think about that, and we'll catch up shortly. Welcome back. I hope you have time to reflect on how you are going to sell your Nike shoe as a salesperson to a 60-year-old couple. This is a very good example. I selected this example because, as you have seen, there is no natural connection between 60-year-olds and Nike shoe. Most 60-year-olds will not even be thinking of having a Nike shoe. But here you are with a task of trying to sell a Nike shoe to 60-year-olds. So let me guess. A typical salesperson will try to sell the benefit of a Nike shoe to 60-year-old, talking about how the shoe is going to help you to dunk in a game of basketball, or how the shoe is going to help you to run a bit faster if you're an athlete. As you can then imagine, these exercises are not of great interest to 60-year-olds. I picked this example because I want to demonstrate that selling is not about your product. It's about the understanding of your consumers and what value you can create for them. So let's move to understand our consumers a bit before we try to sell to them. As I mentioned, they are retired grandmas and grandpa. That means they are likely getting pension. I don't believe they have a problem with cash. Since they are also retired, they might be spending loads of time indoors versus outdoor. They probably are also aware that spending time outdoor is better for their health. Probably the doctor has explained that to them also. So how then can I sell my Nike shoe to this 60-year-old? I'm going to focus on what I call the greater purpose. The greater purpose does not necessarily have something to do with my own product, but it has something to do with the aspirations of my consumers. In this case, the grandparents. So as I mentioned earlier, at that age, health is very important. And maybe the doctors have advised them to take early morning walks or to try to do some form of exercise. Having enough exercise could mean healthier life for them. And when they are healthy, they have more chances of spending more time with their loving and beautiful grandchildren. This is the dream of every grandparent. I'm not selling a Nike shoe here. I'm selling the potential for a healthy life, for happiness. And my job is to show the connection between this aspiration and my Nike shoe. By the way, I will sell the same Nike shoe differently to a branch manager in a bank. I will sell the same shoe differently to a student, to a nursing mother. At the moment when I'm selling, I'm not thinking about my product. I'm always thinking about the value I can create for my consumer. These are good examples of selling. In trying to sell, the big message here is 80% of your effort should not be on your product. Rather should be on the consumer, their situation, their needs, their aspiration. What greater value can you help them to create? This is the big idea around selling. Have you heard about Madam Sarah C.J. Walker before? Sarah was the first Black American woman to become a millionaire. She lived in the early 20th century, and she made a name for herself by producing and selling hair products. In the next segment, I'm going to play a clip for you of Sarah trying to sell her hair product. Actually, that was her first attempt, and I believe she did a great job. Listen to the clip, reflect, and make mental notes on what Sarah was actually selling. Was she selling a hair product, or she was selling what I call a greater purpose? See you soon.
Sisters, let's talk about hair. Hair can be freedom or bondage. The choice is yours. Want a better station in life? Need to make more money? Come on. Let me show you how. I had a Cain versus Abel relationship with my hair. Bet some of y'all do too, huh? See, I was born free 2 years after emancipation. Was orphaned by 7. Married at 14, pregnant at 15, widowed by 20. Had to fend for myself and my baby girl. The only work I could find was in the fields or as a washerwoman. Didn't have time to take care of my hair. I know you know what I mean. Hard work on the farm, ain't it?
Wanted to work at the new hotel, but they say I ain't got the right look.
How many of y'all know what she's talking about? Put us down, don't give us nothing, tell us we're ugly, make us feel ugly. I tell you what, you come by my salon, I'll do your hair for free.
You got yourself a deal.
Bet you some of y'all are wondering why I would do something for nothing. Because I know how hard it is to care for our hair. I know what it's like to not have running water or products made for it. But most important, I know if she look good, we all look good. If you look respectable, we all look respectable. Everything we do as Negroes grows reflects back on us. So if I can help one person, I'm lifting us all up. Wonderful hair growth gives me the confidence every day to beat the enemy, slay the demon, fight the good fight as a colored woman in America. Wonderful hair leads to wonderful opportunities. You hear me? Did you hear me? Oh, wonderful opportunity. Come on, let's get your opportunity.
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the clip from Sarah C.J. Walker, the first black female millionaire in America. She actually made a brand for herself and her product. Did you remember what she said? Wonderful hair gives wonderful opportunities. She was finding a greater purpose, the greater value for our consumer. It's not just about the hair or the hair product. It's about the opportunities you can get for yourself when you have a wonderful hair, which her product was going to guarantee. What I see mostly with salespeople sometimes is that they have a lot of resilience, determination, and optimism about their product. These are great qualities and you must keep them. However, sometimes you need to think about the greater value, opening the eyes of your consumer to what is possible. If you are trying to sell the same product every day and you're not finding success, probably you need to sit back and reflect and think about what is wrong. Is something wrong in the product? Does it deliver the value to the consumer? Or something is wrong in the selling? Meaning, are you finding the greater purpose for your consumer? Are you focusing only on your products and forgetting the needs of the consumer? Think about that. And so far, I'm assuming that your product will deliver on its intrinsic value. That means if you are trying to sell a toothpaste, the product must deliver on the fundamentals. The fundamentals in this case will be the product process, the ability to help clean the teeth, leaving some freshness. This is not a high expectation for a toothpaste. This is what everyone should get from a normal toothpaste. If you are then trying to sell a product that cannot deliver on the intrinsic value or qualities, then really you need to stop trying to sell. You need to go back to the drawing board and fix your product. If, however, your product delivers quality or value to the end users, then you also need to think about the value chain. You also need to begin to look higher up in the value chain to see what value can I create at every step. Higher in the value chain means everyone touching the product as it journeys from you, the manufacturer, down to the consumer. In those layers of chains, again, you must deliver value. Don't forget that value means different things at every layer. To the consumer, it means the product delivers intrinsic benefit. To the retailer, it's about absolute cash. To the big and small wholesalers along the way, it means absolute cash. What do they lose if they don't stock your product? Means that there must be a competitive benefit for all the players that are helping to transport your product to the end user. Don't forget that value creation above the end user is mostly about the absolute cash, absolute naira that you can deliver. The priority to them is what is called return on investment. Earlier, we gave two good examples. First about the Nike shoe, and then about the hair product from Madam C.J. Walker. and we saw how we're able to describe or create a greater purpose for our product. This is a great example of qualitative benefit. This is good when you are talking only to the consumer. Create a dream or finding the problem they are going through and how your product helps to solve that problem. Make sure you understand the aspiration of your consumer and ask yourself, how does my product help them with their aspiration? Recall the example with the 60-year-old. Their aspiration is probably a healthy lifestyle. My job as a salesman is to show them how my Nike shoe will help them to attain that. This is what sales is all about. Focusing on the consumer, their problems, their needs, and their aspiration. Understanding how your product helps them to achieve or to solve those problems. This is a great example of creating a greater purpose. But don't forget, this is only at the consumer level for the end users. In other layers of the value chain, you need to talk about the quantitative benefit of getting involved in their business. If you go back to our example of selling packs of salt in a neighborhood, if you have to sell to the kiosk or to the retail outlet on the street, you only find success if you highlight the quantitative value that you bring. An example, I can increase your total weekly sales by 100 naira or by 1,000 naira if you list my product. Same example will go for the mini or the small and the big wholesalers. They are more interested in the quantitative benefit. Of course, the product delivering on its intrinsic value is important to them, because if the product does not deliver, then they will end up having stocks of your product in their warehouse and nobody willing to buy it. But once you solve the first problem with the consumer and you begin to move up in the value chain, you need to focus more on the quantitative benefit. If you list my product in your warehouse and distribute my product with your trucks around the neighborhood, you can make X amount of naira every month or every week. In some companies, they call this developing selling stories. The selling story to the retail outlet and to the warehouse owners is quantitative. However, to the consumer, it is qualitative. A clear understanding of who you are selling to and what problem they are trying to solve helps a lot to understand how to sell. Oftentimes, I've seen people confusing the different selling skills required for the consumer with those for the retailers and the big wholesale customers. Again, 80% of selling is not about your product. It's about understanding who you are trying to sell to, what are their needs, and how do you help them to solve them. The next time you're trying to sell, think less of your product and more of your customers or your consumers. Even before you get right in front of your audience, think about them. Who are they? What does a typical day in their life looks like? What are the things that make them happy? And what do you think their pain points could be? What are they trying to achieve? How much money do they earn? Or in what earning bracket do they fall? Understanding perfectly your consumer, your customers, and finding the link of how your product can help them is probably one of the biggest secrets in selling. I want to leave you now, and in the next segment, I'm going to have the chance to wrap up, to share my final thought on some topics like promotions and competition within sales. But more importantly, to summarize what we discussed today. Take a breath, and I'll see you shortly. Welcome back. I sincerely hope I've been able to add some values today, because that's my intention. Before I wrap up, I'd like to share some of my thoughts around some elements around sales, like promotions and competition. And after that, I'd like to wrap up and summarize everything that we have learned today. When it comes to promotions, remember the value chain. Before you set up a promotion, before you design a promotion that should help your business, make sure your promotion is helping you to solve a problem. Some products have problems selling at the consumer level. Some other products have problems selling into the small kiosk and retail outlets. Some other products have problems getting into the big wholesalers or the small wholesalers. Unfortunately, some products have all of the problems. Before you design your promotional offers, your discounts, your giveaways, your vouchers, make sure your promotion solves a problem within your value chain. But if there is no problem, you already have a great brand selling very well, it's okay if you still want to do your promotion. However, if you are doing your promotion to help you to sell more, or to break barriers, or to reach new heights, make sure you are targeting your promotion at the right places in the value chain that helps deliver the result that you want. What I'm trying to say is, if you are doing your promotion, make sure it solves a problem for you. The next item I want to talk about is the competition. You are not living on an island, nor are you trying to sell your product on an island. You are not the only one, or your brand is not the only one fighting for space with the wholesalers, big or small, or with the kiosk, with the retailers in the open market, or even with the consumers. So it's very important for you to understand the competitive landscape where you operate. Who is your real competitor? What other brands are you fighting? What do they have to offer versus what you are offering? Do you stand a chance? Oftentimes I see people saying, I will never go into that category, or I will never sell in that space, because there are big competitors there. They've been there for many years and they are very successful. Don't forget that no matter how big a company is, sometimes they have their own flaws. If you remember, in the video conferencing industry around the world, there are many big giants. A couple of years ago, a new competitor came in. That competitor is called Zoom. Zoom is today outpacing other competitors in its space. Zoom had a different idea, a different problem within the whole industry that they wanted to solve. Zoom understood the competitive landscape and they had their strategy on how they are going to play. This is what I'm asking you to do. If you have to play in a competitive landscape, and ideally all of us are playing in a competitive landscape, take a thought about your competitor. Again, who are they? What are their competitive advantage? What chances do you have? What other advantages can you offer to consumers or customers in your value chain today that your competitor cannot offer or is not offering? I'm asking you, if you want to play in the competitive landscape, do not be ignorant. Do not be blind. Take some time to understand the competition also, and understanding what they offer and what they don't offer. Then also plan your strategy on how you will play in that space. So I'll go on and summarize now before I finally wrap up. Today we started off by learning some myths around sales, some natural barriers or some things that we thought sales were, but in reality they are not. The best one for me is about sales is not just a transaction. It is the ability to design a process, a system, or even a mechanism that continuously help to transfer products from the manufacturer down to the consumer. A good salesman can get a transaction across the line, but a great salesman or woman will design this mechanism I'm talking about and ensure success not only today but every day. We then went on to talk about the value chain. We know who are the key players in the value chain, starting from the consumer, where your product must deliver intrinsic values. And like I said, if there are no intrinsic values for your product, we are not yet in business. We then went up in the value chain, understanding what makes the difference for the retailers, the kiosk, in the open market, the wholesalers, big and small. Understanding how to have discussions across the layers is very important. But for me, I guess the biggest learning today is this. Oftentimes we get into the market trying to sell our product, or we get in front of our audience trying to sell the product, and we spend most of the time talking about our product without any understanding of the consumer. So before I make my point again, let me remind you of the era that we live in. There was an era in the history of industry where the most important thing in the industry was the efficiency of the manufacturer. Manufacturers were producing product en masse because they had huge opportunity to sell them. After that era was the era where the most important thing was the product itself. This era also lasted a long time. This is why sometimes today you find some people saying, my mom bought this electric fan and she gave it to me and I'm going to give it to my daughter. The product was the focus of this era, the durability, the functionality and many things were the focus of this era. Some people are still trying to sell today with the ideology of this era. However, we moved into a new era. In the era where we are today, the consumer is the most important element. Understanding the consumer, designing product that meets the consumer need, or finding a greater value for your consumer within your product. This is why I always recommend, as I mentioned earlier today, if you are trying to sell to the consumer, again, spend more time understanding the consumer and talking about the consumer and what value you can create for the consumer rather than talking about your product. And when you come above the consumer, please make sure you understand the quantitative value that you bring. Higher up in the value chain, the qualitative is good, but they are looking for the quantitative benefit. What is the need for them? Or, if I can say, what do they lose if they don't get involved in your business? A good salesman or a good saleswoman is more interested in what value she or he offers to everyone in the value chain touching a product and to the consumer, much more than what the product itself has to offer. I must then close now, but not without saying a big thank you to the facilitator who has given the opportunity to share some of my thoughts with all of you, but more importantly to all of you for listening. This is where I draw the curtain for today. Thank you again, and bye-bye.